In the bustling city of Lagos, where wealth and poverty lived side by side, the roads were always busy with the horns of impatient drivers and the cries of hawkers weaving through the traffic with trays balanced on their heads. On a hot Saturday morning, the streets buzzed even louder, for word had spread that the famous billionaire Chike Obi was finally getting married. His face had graced newspapers, television interviews, and billboards across Nigeria. He was the son of a once struggling trader from Enugu, who had risen through hardship, education, and grit to become one of the most powerful businessmen in West Africa. To the people of the city, his wedding was not just a personal affair. It was a symbol of aspiration, of possibility, of hope for those who dreamed of escaping poverty. The venue was Lekki, in one of the most luxurious churches in the city. Expensive cars rolled into the compound, glittering in the sunlight. Guests dressed in flowing lace, agbadas, and brightly colored gellies filled the space. Musicians were rehearsing their instruments, preparing to play the sounds of celebration. Photographers tested their cameras, waiting to capture the smiles, the tears, and the glamour. Inside the church, chandeliers sparkled above, the marble floors reflected the light, and fresh flowers filled the air with sweetness. But while people clapped their hands and prepared to celebrate, a woman in the distance walked slowly, carrying something that silenced her heart. Her name was Amaka. She was Chike's ex, the one he had once loved with fire so bright it could not be hidden, the one he had promised eternity to before wealth changed everything. In her arms, wrapped in a piece of Ankara cloth, she carried a baby boy. His eyes were still innocent, his tiny fists clenched as though he was ready to fight the world. And though Amaka's steps were steady, her heart trembled. This was not just about love or revenge. This was about truth. Amaka had grown up in Nsukka, a small town where poverty was not strange. She had met Chike in the university. He was brilliant, ambitious. And though he came from a poor family, he spoke with a confidence that made her believe he was born for greatness. They had sat together in classrooms, sharing textbooks when money could not buy two. She had stood with him during nights of hunger, when he borrowed Gary from neighbors just to survive. She had prayed with him before his first big scholarship exam, and when he got his first job, it was she who ironed his shirt and cooked his first celebratory meal. They had whispered dreams under mango trees, dreams of owning a house, raising children and helping their families. But things had changed when Chike's company took off. Wealth came like a flood, and with it came attention, women, and expectations. Slowly, Amaka noticed his phone calls became shorter. His visits home became rare. When he finally ended things, he did not even look her in the eye. His words were sharp, his tone cold. Amaka, I need to move forward. I cannot be tied down by the past. She had wept that night, clutching her belly, for inside her was a child he did not know about. She had chosen not to tell him then. Pride kept her mouth closed. She did not want to look like a desperate woman, holding on to a man with a baby. Instead, she returned to her village when the pregnancy grew, enduring the whispers of neighbors and the disappointment of her parents. You should have married before allowing this, her mother had said, her eyes wet with frustration. Her father, though pained, had supported her, saying, a child is never a curse. Amaka, raise him well. Tomorrow is still long. In the small village, she gave birth to a boy she named Afani, meaning nothing is impossible with God. He became her strength, her reason to fight through the struggles of single motherhood. But now, standing in front of this church, with wedding bells ringing and people cheering, she knew the time had come. Chike could not marry without knowing the truth. He had abandoned her, but he would not abandon his blood. The guards at the church gate looked at her suspiciously. She wore a simple wrapper and blouse, her hair tied in a plain scarf. She did not look like the wealthy guests arriving in cars worth millions. One guard frowned and said, Madam, who are you looking for here? This place is not for everybody. Amaka tightened her grip on her baby and replied, I am looking for Chike Obi. Tell him Amaka is here. The guard laughed, shaking his head. Do you know how many women have been calling his name since morning? If you don't have invitation, you better step aside. Another guard, younger and more observant, noticed the intensity in her eyes. He hesitated, then muttered, Wait here. He walked inside quickly, perhaps to inform someone. Inside the church, Chaik stood tall in a white embroidered agbada, his face glowing with pride. Beside him was Ngozi, his bride, a beautiful daughter of a wealthy politician. Her jewelry sparkled. Her smile radiated confidence. She was the woman society believed was fit for a billionaire. They were about to exchange vows when a younger guard whispered into the ear of Chaik's cousin, who then whispered into his. At first, Chaik frowned, irritated by the interruption. But when he heard the name Amaka, his heart skipped. Memories rushed back, memories he had buried beneath money and fame. He glanced at the entrance of the church, and there she stood, Amaka, his past, holding a child who looked unsettlingly familiar. The crowd turned. Whispers rippled through the hall. Guests craned their necks, shocked at the sight of a woman bold enough to interrupt such a wedding. Ngozi's smile faded, confusion written across her face. The priest, too, paused, sensing tension. Amaka's voice rang out, steady but heavy with pain. "Chaik, before you marry, look at your son." The baby stirred in her arms, his big brown eyes fixed on a man who was his father. A silence deeper than any sermon filled the church. Chaik felt his throat tighten. He wanted to deny it, to shout that it was a lie. But even from a distance, he saw himself in the boy's eyes, in the shape of his nose, in the curve of his lips. His mind screamed, his heart pounded, and his world spun. Ngozi stepped back, glaring at him with betrayal. Her father, seated among the dignitaries, clenched his jaw in anger. Guests began murmuring loudly, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. And Amaka, though her knees trembled, stood firm. She had not come to beg. She had not come to destroy. She had come for truth. And in that moment, the truth was louder than all the music, all the wealth, and all the pride. The silence that fell inside the church that morning was unlike anything anyone had ever felt before. For a moment, the laughter, the music, the rustling of lace fabrics, and the clinking of jewelry all disappeared. Only the heavy sound of hearts beating could be heard. It was as though time itself had stopped to witness this confrontation between love, betrayal, and truth. Chaik's palms grew sweaty as he looked at Amaka. He had seen her in his dreams many times since he left her, but never like this. Never standing before him in front of hundreds of guests, holding a child who mirrored his face so perfectly. His throat went dry, and though he tried to compose himself, his lips quivered slightly. Ngozi turned to him, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Chaik, what is this? Who is she? And that child?" The crowd began to murmur louder. Some women pressed their hands to their mouths, whispering, the billionaire has a child outside marriage." Others shook their heads with pity. "This girl is strong, to bring the child here like this." The men whispered among themselves, "This is a scandal, a disgrace. How will he explain this one?" Amaka took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Chaik's. She raised her voice, not out of anger, but out of years of buried pain. "You promised me forever, Chaik. You held my hands under the mango tree in Succa and told me you could never live without me. When hunger pressed you, I shared my last piece of bread. When the world mocked you, I stood by you. And when you left me, I was carrying your son in my womb." Gasps echoed through the church. An elder woman sitting among the guests shook her head and muttered, "Ha! Man, see how they forget the women who suffer with them in their days of struggle." Ngozi's father rose angrily from his chair, his voice booming across the hall. "Is this true, Chaik? Did you leave this woman with a child? Do you know the shame you bring to my family today?" Chaik's lips parted, but no words came out. He glanced at the baby again, and his chest ached. He had denied many things in his life, but this little boy, was undeniable. The resemblance was too strong, too clear. He closed his eyes for a second, fighting tears that threatened to betray his carefully built image of strength. Ngozi's eyes were now blazing with rage. She pulled her hand away from Chaik's and shouted, "So this is who you really are? A liar, a deceiver. You brought me here to make me a laughingstock before the whole nation." She turned and stormed down the aisle, her gilly bouncing as she moved, her bridesmaids following her in confusion. Ngozi's father signaled to his aides, and they followed as well, leaving the church in chaos. The priest, helpless, lowered his head and whispered a prayer under his breath. This was no longer a wedding. It was a battlefield of truths. Amaka stood still, her baby shifting in her arms. The little boy let out a small cry, sensing the tension in the air. She hushed him softly, rocking him gently. For a moment, the guests saw not just a scandal, but a mother protecting her child. Some felt pity for her, others disgust for the drama, but none could deny the courage it took for her to walk into that hall. Chaik finally found his voice. It was low at first, almost a whisper. Amaka, why now? Why today of all days? Amaka's eyes glistened with tears, but her face remained strong. Because you were about to bury the truth forever. Because my son deserves to know his father, no matter how rich or powerful you think you are. And because I will not allow you to start a new life built on lies. A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. One elderly man nodded and said loudly, "She is right. A child should know his father." Chaik stepped forward, ignoring the cameras flashing and the whispers around him. He looked directly into the baby's eyes. The boy blinked back at him, his lips trembling as though he wanted to speak. Chaik's chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, a tear slid down his cheek. He reached out his hand slowly. What is his name? Amaka's voice softened. Ifani, because with God, nothing is impossible. The name struck him deeply. Ifani, a name of faith, of strength. Chaik's lips quivered as he repeated it. Ifani, he looked at Amaka again, and for the first time in years, he saw not the woman he had left behind, but the woman who had once been his anchor, his companion in struggle, his first love. But reality soon crashed back. The guests were still watching, recording, whispering. His reputation, his business, his image, all of it was at stake. He turned, and his eyes met those of journalists already typing furiously into their phones. Tomorrow's headlines would not spare him. His cousin, Uche, quickly approached, whispering harshly, "We need to get you out of here before this ruins everything." Chaik shook his head, his voice firm for the first time. "No, I cannot run. Not today." He turned back to Amaka, his face torn between guilt and pride. "You should have told me earlier," he said quietly. "You should not have waited until today." Amaka's voice cracked, but she held back her tears. "And would you have listened, Chaik? When you began to rise, did you even pick my calls? Did you not block me, shut me out, and act as though I never existed? Tell me, would you have listened?" Her words cut deep, and he could not answer. Because in truth, she was right. He had been blinded by ambition, by the lights of success, by the pressure to belong to a higher class. He had left her behind, thinking he could erase his past. But now his past stood before him, living, breathing, wrapped in Ankara cloth and innocence. The baby whimpered again, and Amaka rocked him. For a brief moment, her mask of strength slipped, and her vulnerability showed. She looked around the church, at the staring eyes, the murmuring lips, and whispered, "I did not come to shame you, Chaik. I came for my son. He deserves his place in this world, even if it is not beside you." The words stung him more than anything. He realized then that Amaka had not come to destroy his wedding, though it seemed that way. She had come for recognition, for acknowledgement, for dignity. And in that moment, he hated himself. Not for being caught, not for the scandal, but for the years he had lost with his child, years he could never get back. The church slowly began to empty as people realized the wedding was ruined. Some stayed back, eager to see how the drama would end. Outside, the streets buzzed with gossip, traders shouting, "Have you heard? The billionaire's wedding has scattered." It was on everyone's lips, spreading faster than fire in Harmattan. Amaka turned to leave, her heart heavy but steady. She had said her truth. Whether Chaik accepted it or not, she had done what was right for her child. She adjusted the cloth around her baby and began to walk out of the church. But then, Chaik's voice rang out, strong and clear. "Wait!" Everyone froze. Amaka stopped, her back still turned to him. Slowly, she turned around. Their eyes locked once more, and this time, Chaik's gaze was softer, almost pleading. He took a deep breath and said, "Don't go. Not yet." The baby blinked curiously at him, as though waiting to hear what his father would say next. And the crowd, though restless, leaned in to listen, sensing that the story was not yet over. When Chaik's voice echoed through the church, commanding Amaka not to leave, even the remaining guests who had been drifting outside hurried back in. Something in his tone had changed. It was no longer the cold, dismissive arrogance of a billionaire who had everything the world could offer. It was a trembling urgency of a man whose heart was finally confronting the very thing he had buried deepest. Amaka turned slowly, holding Afani tighter against her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line, her brows knitted with caution. She had spoken her truth already. What more could he possibly want? She expected another excuse, perhaps an attempt to save face before the wealthy crowd. But the way he looked at her now, she could see the conflict raging inside him. Chaik stepped down from the altar, his agbada sweeping the floor as he moved closer. Every step he took seemed to shake the air in the church. His best man tried to hold him back, whispering frantically, "Chaik, think of the press. Think of the deal with Ngozi's father. You cannot afford the scandal." But Chaik brushed his hand away without even looking back. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business or politics. He was thinking about blood, about roots, about the boys staring at him with innocent eyes. When he stood before Amaka, close enough to feel the warmth of the child between them, his voice lowered, no longer booming but soft and raw. "Amaka, I was wrong. I abandoned you. I abandoned what we shared. I thought money would erase the past, but I see now it only made me blind. That boy, he is mine. I cannot deny it." The word spread like wildfire through the crowd. A woman near the back clasped her hands together and exclaimed, "At last, he admits it." Another muttered, "Pride has a way of humbling men." Some of the guests shook their heads in pity, while others whispered about how Ngozi's family would surely take revenge for this humiliation. Amaka's lips trembled, but she steadied herself. "It took you standing at the altar for you to remember the woman who shared her life with you. Do you know the nights I went hungry so you could eat? Do you know the shame I endured in the village when my belly began to show and people whispered, 'She has been abandoned'? Do you know how many times I prayed you would call, even just once, to ask if I was alive?" Her voice broke then, and for the first time since stepping into the church, tears spilled down her cheeks. The sight of her crying shook Chaik to his core. He remembered those nights too, their shared laughter, their whispered dreams, her faith in him when no one else believed. He had buried it all beneath wealth, thinking he could build a new identity. But here she was, holding the living proof of their love, reminding him that no amount of money could rewrite truth. "I was foolish," Chaik admitted, his own voice cracking. "Ambition swallowed me. I wanted to climb so high that I forgot who pushed me when I was at the bottom. I wanted acceptance from people who looked down on me, and in trying to win them, I lost myself. And I lost you." He looked at the child, his hand trembling as he reached forward. "Please, let me hold my son." The church hushed again, waiting to see what Amaka would do. Her grip tightened around Afani protectively. Memories flashed in her mind, of raising him alone, of nights when he was sick and there was no one to rush for medicine, of neighbors mocking her for being a single mother. She had carried the burden alone all these years. Could she really let this man, who had turned his back on her, hold the child so easily now? But then, Afani stretched his little hand toward Chaik, his tiny fingers curling in the air. It was as though his spirit knew something his mother's pain could not accept. Amaka's heart softened. Slowly, cautiously, she placed the boy into Chaik's arms. The moment Afani rested against his father's chest, the child stilled, staring up at him curiously before breaking into a small, toothless smile. Chaik's body shook as emotion overwhelmed him. His arms, strong enough to carry businesses and fortunes, trembled as they carried his own flesh and blood for the first time. He pressed his lips to the boy's forehead, tears slipping freely down his cheeks. "My son," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My blood, forgive me." The guests sighed, some openly crying, others nodding at the sight. Even the priest, who had been silent all through the drama, wiped his eyes discreetly. For all the scandal, there was something sacred about a father's recognition of his child. But as the tender moment unfolded, a loud, angry voice cut through the air. It was Ngozi's father, who had returned into the church with several political allies. His face was thunderous, his eyes blazing with rage. "So, this is the man you want us to entrust our daughter to? A man who hides bastards in the shadows? A man who disgraces us before the nation?" Chaik stiffened, clutching Afani protectively. "He is not a bastard," he said firmly. "He is my son." The hall shook with the man's laughter, bitter and sharp. "Then you have made your choice, Chaik. You have chosen a village girl, and her child over my daughter. Do you know what this means for you? Do you know the doors that will close, the contracts that will be withdrawn, the enemies you will make?" Chaik swallowed hard. The weight of the man's words was heavy. He knew it was true. Ngozi's family held power in government, and marrying her had been more than love. It had been a strategic alliance. Now all of that would crumble. The stock market would react. Investors would panic. And the empire he had built could begin to shake. But then he looked down at Afani, who was staring at him with wide, innocent eyes. For the first time in years, Chaik felt clarity. What use was wealth if it came at the cost of his own blood? What use was power if he had to live as a stranger to his son? He lifted his head, his voice steady and strong. "I would rather lose the world than lose my son. If your doors close to me, let them close. But this one, this child, will not grow up calling another man father while I live." The guests gasped again, some clapping in admiration, others shaking their heads at the foolishness of what they saw as a man throwing away riches for sentiment. Ngozi's father glared at him with venom, then stormed out once more, muttering curses under his breath. The church emptied further, leaving only a handful of guests who stayed behind out of loyalty or curiosity. Amaka stood frozen, overwhelmed by the turn of events. She had expected denial, rejection, perhaps even humiliation. She had not expected Chaik to choose their son over power. "Why now?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Why after all these years?" Chaik turned to her, still holding Afani close. "Because I was blind, but I see now. I cannot undo the past. Amaka, I cannot take away the pain I caused you. But if you will let me, I want to be here now. For him, for you, for what we once had." Amaka shook her head, tears flowing again. "It's not that simple. You think a few words can erase the years I suffered alone? You think this child will not one day ask me why his father was not there when he took his first steps, when he called his first word? You cannot buy back time, Chaik." Her words cut, but they were true. Chaik lowered his head in shame. He had built skyscrapers, owned companies, bought properties across continents. But here before this woman and child, he was powerless against the weight of lost years. Still, he lifted his gaze again, determination shining through his tears. "Then let me try, Amaka. Let me spend the rest of my life trying. Not because I pity you, not because I want to save face, but because this is my responsibility, and because I still love you." Amaka's chest tightened. She wanted to laugh at the irony, to spit back that love meant nothing after betrayal. But deep inside, where bitterness had not fully hardened, she felt a flicker, a small, dangerous flicker of the love they once shared. She pushed it down quickly, reminding herself of the years of silence, of the scars she still carried. The baby stirred and yawned, as if reminding them both that the story was no longer just about the two of them, but about him, about his future. The priest, who had been silent all along, finally stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "My children, today was meant to unite two souls, but God has revealed another truth. Marriage cannot be built on lies. As for you, my son," he looked at Chaik, "wealth without integrity will always crumble. You have made your choice. May you stand by it with courage." The church bell rang in the distance, not for a wedding, but like a warning of a new chapter. Outside, the city was already alive with gossip, and Amaka knew life would never be the same again. But as she looked at Chaik holding their son with tears in his eyes, she wondered, was this the beginning of healing, or simply another wound waiting to open? The crowd outside the church had thickened, buzzing like a marketplace. Hawkers who had been selling soft drinks and puff-puff were now recounting the drama to eager listeners. Drivers leaned on their car horns, debating whether the billionaire's reputation would survive the scandal. Street children ran barefoot, shouting, "Baba Fani Don come, Billionaire get Pekin." And in every corner of Lagos, phones vibrated with messages, gossip spreading like wildfire. Inside, the once-decorated hall now looked stripped of its joy. The flowers that had been meant for celebration looked almost mocking now, their fragrance cloying in the tense air. The priest sat quietly, saying nothing more, while Chaik remained at the altar, his agbada stained with tears from holding his son. Amaka stood a few steps away, clutching her wrapper tightly, her face torn between pride and exhaustion. The baby stirred again, tiny hands reaching upward, as if unbothered by the storm around him. It was almost as though the child was the only one who knew no shame in this place. He had done nothing but be born into a web of love and betrayal woven by adults. Chaik finally broke the silence. "Amaka, please, do not walk away again. Let us talk, not here in front of these eyes, but in a place where I can hear your heart." Amaka shook her head. Her voice was low, but every word was firm. "You think my heart is a door you can open and close when it suits you. You closed it years ago, Chaik, and I learned to live without you. Do not think you can walk back in and find it waiting." Her words struck him, and for a moment he lowered his eyes in shame. But then he raised them again, determination burning. "You are right. I don't deserve forgiveness. But Afani deserves his father. He deserves a name, a future. I cannot undo the past, Amaka, but I can give him tomorrow." Amaka's lips trembled. She wanted to scream that tomorrow meant nothing when yesterday had been filled with pain. She wanted to tell him that the child needed more than just money and a name. He needed presence, consistency, love. But before she could speak, the doors of church slammed open again. Ngozi returned. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red with fury. Flanked by her father's bodyguards, she walked straight down the aisle, ignoring the gasps that followed her. She stopped in front of Chaik, her voice shaking but sharp. "So this is what you've chosen? A forgotten village girl, and her bastard child over me? Do you know what you have thrown away?" Chaik held Afani closer, his tone calm but resolute. "I know exactly what I have chosen. My son is not a bastard. He is my blood. And Amaka is not just a village girl. She is a woman who stood by me when I was nothing." Ngozi's chest heaved with anger. "You fool! You think the world will honor you for this? They will laugh at you. They will crush you. And when your empire falls, do not crawl back to me." She spat on the floor and stormed out again, her father following, his face dark with shame. The door shut behind them with a thud, leaving the church eerily quiet once more. Amaka let out a shaky breath. She had expected humiliation, but not this. She had not thought Chaik would stand before the whole city and claim her child so boldly. She searched his face, trying to see if this was just pride speaking, or the man she once loved was truly still there. Chaik turned to her again, his voice trembling. "I cannot promise to erase your pain, but I promise this, Amaka, I will not abandon you again. Come with me, even if it means we go back to the beginning, even if the world mocks us. I would rather walk the muddy roads of Nsukka with you and our son than walk the red carpets of Lagos alone." The words broke something inside Amaka. For years she had built walls around her heart, protecting herself from disappointment, teaching herself to be strong. And yet here he was, breaking those walls with the same voice that once whispered promises under mango trees. She hated him for it, but a part of her also longed for it. She turned away, tears spilling freely. "Do you think it is that easy? Do you think my father will welcome you after the shame? Do you think my mother will forgive you for leaving me to carry this alone? Do you know what it means to return to the village, to face those who mocked me and said, 'See how our big man left her'?" Chaik took a step closer, his hand gently brushing her shoulder. "Then let me face them with you. Let them see that I came back, not to boast, not to show off wealth, but to kneel before them and say I was wrong. Let them see me carry water from your father's well. Let them see me sit at your mother's fire. If that is what it takes to heal what I broke, then I will do it." Amaka's knees weakened. For the first time, she believed him, But belief did not erase fear. What if he changed again? What if tomorrow the glitter of wealth pulled him back into arrogance? What if Afani grew up only to learn that his father's promises were as fleeting as smoke? Before she could answer, the baby began to cry loudly, wriggling in Chaik's arms. Chaik rocked him awkwardly, unfamiliar with the rhythm of soothing a child. Amaka instinctively reached for the baby, and their hands brushed as the boy moved between them. The touch lingered, silent, heavy with years of unspoken love. The priest cleared his throat gently. My children, sometimes God does not give us the wedding we planned, but the truth we needed. You both must decide now, not for the crowd, not for the gossip, but for the child. The words hung in the air. Amaka looked at Chaik, then at her son, then back at Chaik. Her voice broke as she whispered, "We will go home first, to the village. If you truly mean this, you will face them with me." Chaik nodded firmly. "Then to the village we go." And so, days later, the billionaire who had once lived in penthouses and flown private jets found himself sitting in the back of a dusty bus, traveling the winding roads in Succa with Amaka and their child. People on the bus whispered, recognizing his face from newspapers, but he ignored them. For once, he felt peace. When they arrived, the village children ran barefoot to greet them, curious about the big man who had once abandoned their sister. Amaka's father stood at the doorway of his mud-walled house, his expression stern. Her mother sat beside him, pounding fufu, her face unreadable. Amaka stepped forward nervously. "Papa, Mama, I have brought him." Her father's voice was hard. "And why should we open our doors to him now?" Before Amaka could speak, Chaik dropped his knees in the dust, his agbada stained instantly. He held a fani in one hand and placed his other hand on the ground. "Papa, Mama, I wronged your daughter. I wronged your family. I let pride blind me, and I abandoned the one who stood by me when I was nothing. I have no excuse. But I beg you, let me make it right. Let me be a father to my son, a husband to your daughter, a son to this home." The villagers who had gathered gasped. A billionaire kneeling in the dust? It was unheard of. Some whispered, "Perhaps he truly has changed." Others shook their heads. But Amaka's mother put down her pestle and came forward slowly. She looked into his tear-streaked face, then at her grandson, who cooed softly. Her eyes softened. She touched his shoulder and said quietly, "A child needs his father, but a woman needs more than words. If you are here for both, then rise. If not, leave now and never return." Chaik nodded, still on his knees. "I am here for both, and I will not leave." Amaka's father studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "We shall see." That night, as the moon rose over Nsukka, the villagers gathered outside, talking about what had happened. Some mocked, others admired, but Amaka sat quietly with Afani asleep in her arms. Chaik sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. She did not know what the future held. Maybe love would heal, maybe wounds would remain. But one thing was certain. Afani would grow up knowing his father's voice, his father's arms, and his father's name. And in the quiet of that village night, beneath the rustle of palm trees and hum of crickets, hope, fragile but real, began to grow again.